Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all 389 Bach chorale harmonizations. Today we're going to be looking at Nun komm der Heiden Heiland, which translates to Now Come, Savior of the Gentiles. It's a pretty straightforward chorale. The point of harmonic intrigue in this chorale, if there was one, is right here at the end of the first system. We have another one of those cadences where I'm not 100% sure if we modulate or if we are staying in the key of B minor. I'll leave that up to you to decide, but this cadence right here is something that you hear in Bach's chorales from time to time where he cadences on a chord, and it's not quite like a half cadence, it's not quite a deceptive cadence, it just is kind of its own thing, and he's cadencing on a chord. But as far as the analysis is concerned, it's kind of hard to say, what exactly is going on. That being said, we are in the key of B minor. We start on B minor. We end on B major. That's just a Picardy third there, no modulation. That'd be kind of atypical for Bach's time to modulate between the two, sort of like these two separate ideas. Mixing the idea of major and minor within a phrase is one thing, but fully modulating from one to the other would be kind of odd. We start off with a B minor triad with a passing seventh in the bass. We then get a C sharp minor 7 flat 5 over G, right? G, C sharp, E, and B. So that's a 2 chord. It's half diminished, and it's in second inversion, so that's a 4-3 chord. Passing seventh in the tenor, or it's not a passing seventh, it's a neighboring seventh in the tenor, and then we have an F sharp minor triad, interestingly enough. So right now we're already sort of playing with the idea of modality, as if this were an F sharp major triad, the A would be major. So we have a minor 5 here. So this is a melody written by Martin Luther, and it's based on an even older melody by St. Ambrose, very, very old melody. We're talking about Greece at this point, or Ambrose. Actually, I need to go ahead and verify that. I remember learning about Ambrose in my History of the Catholic Church class, and I need to remember if maybe he was an Egyptian priest. He was either Egyptian or Greek, something like that. They were all in and around the Mediterranean Sea there. But yeah, the fact that Bach is, I don't even want to say making modal concessions, but the fact that he's composing based on a modal melody means that, sometimes modal chords are going to arise, and your harmony textbook will tell you that 5 in minor keys is major because of the leading tone, but we see in real world examples here that that's not necessarily the case, and Bach's music is a result of transformation over time. Tonality wasn't 100% crystal yet. So we get these, strong chords. This is a minor 5. We are very much in the key of B minor, and this is an F sharp minor triad. So there you go. We then have another B minor triad here, but this time it's over D. So that would be a 1-6 chord. And we kind of have this minor third leap in the bass, which turns it into a 5-3. But we also have a G here as well, and an A, so we have some other passing counterpoint going on in the alto here, which kind of muddies the effect of B minor still being an idea on beat 4 and, but at this point really B minor is what's in the ear. We then have E, B, G, and C sharp. That's another C sharp diminished chord, but this time it's half diminished, and it's over E, so that'd be a 2-6-5. And then we kind of have a 1 here in between it, because we get the same chord again, but with all these passing tones, or neighbor tones. We have 2 neighbor tones and a passing tone. We get another passing 1 before we get the same chord again. And then we get F sharp, A, or we get the same chord again on this beat right here before we kind of get an F sharp and, an E and a C. This is just a 5-7 happening right here on the off beat before we cadence on 1 for a perfect authentic cadence in the key of B minor. So the 5-7 happens later. So 2, 6, and 5. Again, with the counterpoint, the chords blend together. So there are tones from one, and then there are tones from another, and then blend together to ultimately create the cadence, but the chords are not always lined up note for note for note on the same beat. We've seen this in Bach's music and the chorales we've seen before. In fact, the majority of his cadences are contrapuntal in some way in comparison to the rest of the chorale, which is generally more homorhythmic. All right, moving on, we have another B minor triad, B, D, F sharp, and B. Some passing tones in the tenor and the soprano. And then we have another B minor triad, B, D, F sharp, and D. Some vocal exchange, and the bass leaps up. So no need to reanalyze. We then get A, C sharp, A, and E. This leading tone right here kind of tonicizes A a little bit. This would just be our regular old 7 chord. And this is where it starts to get kind of interesting. So I'm going to analyze it in the key of B minor first. And then I'm going to analyze it in the key of G major, because this cadence is kind of interesting. It's not one that you would sort of expect, or the textbook wouldn't tell you about it, or a textbook rather. It doesn't really fall into any of the groups of like authentic, plagal, deceptive, or half. It's sort of its own thing. He's cadencing on his own chord, so if we want the analysis to agree with the textbook, we'd have to write in a modulation, I believe, but we'll take a look. Passing 7th in the bass here, we have F sharp, D, B, and D, or F sharp, D, A, and D. I'm going to go ahead and call that a 3 chord in first inversion, because 7 wants to go to 3 as opposed to going to 7 going to 1. 7 can also go to 1, and in fact, because there are modal implications in this melody, there might even be an argument to be made that this is going to 1, but I think because A is first, we'll call this a passing tone. Either way, 1 and 3, like I said, usually the bones of contention when you're analyzing a single chord comes down to chords that are a third apart, because they are mostly in common, right? They have 2 notes that are the same, which I've said a lot. It's like one of my catchphrases almost. And then we have E, G, C sharp, and E. That is a 7 chord, a C sharp diminished chord in first inversion. So it's kind of interesting. We get 7 in one quality, 3, 7 in another quality. Then we have D, A, D, and F, which is another 3 chord, right? And then we cadence on G, which is 6. Now, to me, it doesn't sound like a modulation has happened, but then again, I think the reason why the modulation doesn't sound like it's happened yet when I listen to the chorale is more of a byproduct of modality. In modal music, modal counterpoint, if you listen to it or if you look at the sheet music, you'll find that composers would just cadence on vertical sonority or vertical consonances. It wasn't necessarily about ending, like in the middle of the music, it wasn't necessarily about starting or ending on the tonic or on the 5th. Sometimes, like if you were in the key of E, like if you had they wouldn't even really be using terms like key yet, because that wasn't really in the vocabulary. But if you were using, E Phrygian mode, cadencing on E and B is one thing, but you'd also get cadences on C and you'd get cadences on A, just because you can create vertical consonances consisting of those with other intervals in the mode, usually open 5ths and 3rds, but mostly 5ths, at least in my experience analyzing the music. That being said, if we were true to the key of B minor here, we would do that, but if we were true to the key of G major, which is what makes more sense to me, we could say, and we'll go ahead and just put B minor here to remind us that we're in the key of B minor. If we're in the key of G major, this is a 5-6 chord because that's a D major chord. 7-6 would be 7-6 of 5. We then get 5. And then we get 1. So this would be an imperfect authentic cadence of sorts, I believe. Analyzing it in the key of B minor doesn't really give you anything, because really this 3 chord, this D chord, could be contextualized as 5 of 6, especially with the C natural here. So I'll go ahead and analyze it as such, because the C natural sort of implies that over 3, 5 of 6, and then we get a cadence on 6. But really, you know, as far as the analysis is concerned, sorry, I'm just knocking everything all over the place today. I think the G major analysis looks a little bit more elegant, just because we're getting a cadence that just looks better on paper. But I think there's nuance to it, because it's something that sounds typically like Bach and his chorales, but I don't know exactly what's happening, because we're cadencing on 6. It's not a deceptive cadence though, because it's not 5 going to 6. We're tonicizing 6, and that's different. Not to be confused with like this being a 5 chord, which would be F sharp major going to G major, which is a very particular sound, right? It's parallel major chords. It's interesting. I don't know exactly what to attribute it to. Maybe I need to do a little bit more research and deep diving so that next time I have an answer. But here's an analysis in G major. Here's analysis in B minor. They're relative key, or they're local keys. They're close in proximity to one another on the circle of fifths. So I think that's enough of a reason to suggest that maybe a modulation has happened. But that being said, it does pretty quickly go back to B minor in the next system, because we're getting ready for a perfect authentic cadence in the key of B minor at the next fermata. So we have F sharp, A, and D. So that would be, if we're still in the key of G major, that would be a D major over F sharp, or a 5 chord in first inversion. If we're in the key of B minor, that would be a 3 chord in first inversion with a passing tone in the bass. And then we get 5-3 of the same chord, passing or neighboring 7th in the bass. And the interesting thing here is that if we look at the chord above it, we have D, E, A, and E. We have 2 E's going on above it, but if you look at what happens on the next beat, you see that these are just like suspensions or accented non-chord tones. Bach did this in, if not the last chorale, a chorale from a couple episodes ago, where he would stress the suspension by not tying it over, but playing like a sus chord, right? Because this E is 2, and then it turns into 1 in the tenor and 3 in the soprano, which is really interesting, right? So then this is where we really get this right here is really when the chord turns into D major. Like for the first time, it's a root position D major chord. And then we have some passing tones in all the voices. If we look at it, we have A sharp, C sharp, and E. That is 7. And we would expect that to go to 1. We have F sharp, B, B, D, but it's actually G, B, B, D. It's a 6 chord with a passing 7th in the bass. So I'm not even going to mark it. It's just chromatic. There's chromatic movement. Maybe there's a passing chord there. Who knows? It happens so infrequently that really I think what's to be enjoyed there is the fact that you're getting a really crunchy sound. The voices are moving half steps in contrary directions from one another, so you get a really crunchy sound. But 3 wants to go to 6. That's why I'm going to analyze it as such. Whether it's going to 1, 6, 4, or 6, like I said, I think it's more likely that it's going to 6, because second inversion triads have functioned in the typical way. I think that theorists have really that's been something that's been codified that's really actually true, is the way that 6/4 chords are treated, at least in chorale style, is that you really only see them in a couple of different circumstances. So if it breaks your expectation, or if it breaks the mold, it's probably something else. And in this case, I'm going to go with the 6 chord. I have reason to believe that that's the case. Then we have another C sharp minor 7 flat 5. So E, B, C sharp, and E. So this is an incomplete spelling, but actually that's kind of interesting. This is not a B, this is a G, my apologies. C sharp, G, E, G, C sharp, and E. This is not even a minor 7 flat 5. It's because I confused this with the B. This is actually just a 7/6 chord. Because it's over the E. It's a C sharp, or it's a 2/6. It's a 2/6 chord. My apologies. Goodness, I am off of my game today, and it makes more sense that it's a 2/6 chord, because where does 6 want to go other than 2? It can go to 5. It can go to a bunch of other places. It really can. 6 is a tonic functioning chord, so it can really go anywhere. But generally speaking, it wants to go to 2, just via the cycle of falling fifths. So then we have F sharp, C sharp, A sharp, C sharp. That's a 5 chord. So we just have a 3/6, 2/5, 1 here. Perfect authentic cadence, which is how you would sort of expect it to function. And again, we have B. We have another tonic triad here. The bass leaps up, but otherwise the chord is the same. We have a passing 7th in the bass, and then we get G sharp, E sharp, B, and C sharp. This is not a C sharp diminished triad, but now it's C sharp major over G sharp, or C sharp 7 over G sharp even. So that would be a C sharp 7 chord in second inversion, and that would be the dominant of F sharp, which is 5. So we have 5 of 5 here, with a neighbor tone in the tenor, and then we get F sharp, C sharp, F sharp, A natural. You might be wondering, Forrest, why do you put uppercase 5 if it goes to a lowercase 5? And the reason why I do that is because of, the main reason is because of the linear nature of music, right? So you don't know what's coming next. And the analysis, you could, I do often skip ahead to guide my analysis forward. But as far as the way that my analysis looks on the page, I want it to read from left to right, as if you were reading the music from left to right. If I put 5 here, that would give away the fact that the 5 is coming next. And honestly, there's no problem with that. Like I said, that me saying that scenario out loud made it sound a lot, tamer than the way I had it spun up in my head. You expect an uppercase 5 in minor keys, right? The majority of the 5 chords that have occurred in the minor keys so far have been major in quality. Here, actually, here we have a C sharp chord, which is another major chord. So they're actually pretty even right now. But the majority of the time in minor keys, the 5 chord is going to be major, just because it usually serves a dominant function. A lowercase 5 is not a dominant functioning chord, which is not what it's trying to function here. It's just functioning as part of the scale. We have a neighbor tone in the bass and a passing tone in the alto. But yeah, so I expect 5/4/3 of 5, but it goes to lowercase 5. And it's interesting because this is what I would expect to happen. This is what actually happens. Ultimately, there's really no difference between me putting uppercase and lowercase here, because this is just signifying the fact that this is the dominant of a dominant. They would be the same chord otherwise, or same chord in either circumstance. And then we have F sharp, A, and D here. So this is no longer 5 uppercase. This is now 3, 6, and 3 and 5 are close to one another because they're a third apart. And we have then we have passing tone here, and kind of an interesting tone here. I think it's called an escape tone, which is where it's stepped into and leapt out of. It's either an appoggiatura or escape tone. I always forget the two, but it's a non-chord tone regardless. Now C, here we get A sharp, G, F sharp, C, and this is not G, this is E. I said that I'd do this to confuse myself less, but I've ended up confusing myself more, so I'm going to have to meditate on what I want to do. This is an F sharp 7 chord over A sharp, so that's 5, 6, 5. Then we have some movement here. This is really just counterpoint, so I'm going to mark the non-chord tones. And then we have F sharp, then it just turns into a 5 chord here, right? It just turns into 5, 3, because the 7 is only very brief. We have another chord here. A sharp is there. All of the contents are still here, but the E moves from being on a strong metric position to a relatively weak metric position before cadencing on 1 uppercase. Perfect authentic cadence. This chorale, the more that I talk about it, this chorale is actually very explorational for me. It's deceptively simple because the chords more or less function the way that you would expect. The only argument I think that really could be made with the analysis here is this section right here. The G major analysis looks more elegant, but it doesn't necessarily sound like a modulation to me. I think something other than modality is at play here. I think that there's definitely, tonality is at play here. I think there's definitely some modality being injected into the texture here. I mean, we already have a Dorian sound with the G sharp and the A natural, and 7 going to 1, or using 7 as opposed to a dominant is already a very modal idea. And I think it lends itself to, when we're seeing like A major and G major in close proximity to one another, it lends itself to have more of a modal sound. But all in all, it's a very beautiful chorale. I'm very fond of this chromatic moment that happens here in the second system. And all in all, very straightforward to analyze. It's always very interesting to see lowercase 5s in music. I mean, if you take a harmony class, you'll probably learn that you won't see lowercase 5s in music all that often. They're almost, what would you say? They're almost non-existent. But they happen. They happen, if you look for them, they happen, because 5 doesn't always serve a dominant function. It's called the dominant, but what makes it dominant is the way it's contextualized. And in major keys, you contextualize it in one way. And in minor keys, you have the option to contextualize it in 2 ways. And the majority of the time, it's contextualized as the dominant, but sometimes, as we could see here, it's not. And it's okay to embrace that. It's okay to break the mold that the textbook tells you, because it's the music that you learn from, not necessarily from the textbook per se, at least not entirely. That being said, this very beautiful chorale. This is a chorale that I was somewhat familiar with, not like how to play it or how it sounded. I was familiar with the title because I think I had looked at one of the cantatas that had this as the primary. This was the primary melody. I don't remember when I did, but it happened at some point during my bachelor's or my master's. So at some point, it's just a lot of the music gets muddied together because there's so much of it. But that being said, the analysis was straightforward, and I look forward to tomorrow's chorale. Thanks for watching, everyone, and take care.